Welcome to the third episode of In Her Skin. I am Coralie Palick.
Catherine Willigas.
So our last episode we talked about, it was kind of our first of what will be probably a multiple part series of discussing infertility. I got pregnant, I think it was Christmas Eve or the day before Christmas Eve of that same year that I found out I was pregnant. Ended up having a miscarriage at 8 weeks. You know, I was really surprised at, so we went, did ultrasound, heartbeat, everything was looking good. To be honest, I forget what the reason was. They had me come back a week or two later, and when they did the ultrasound again, there was no heartbeat. So I was really shocked looking back at it, at how devastated I was. So miscarriages are extremely common, particularly at that stage. Again, not that it's really talked about or addressed. I felt extremely alone in the experience I was having. I felt that even though people were sympathetic, no fault of their own, that I was almost looked at as being, I felt I was looked at as that I was totally overreacting. Not that anybody said that, but if I did kind of show them how broken I was about it, it was kind of like,
You're being petty.
Really?
Yeah. Okay.
I felt guilt. I felt humiliation, which nobody that I expressed that to understood. Mm-hmm. I felt like I was looked upon, like I wasn't able to do my duty. That I wasn't able to do what my body was supposed to do. I think group that in with the fact that I'm a little older than Tim, and I already had a little bit of an insecurity about that. I felt like everybody was looking at me like, same, yeah, like she couldn't do it, her body couldn't do it.
Old bird.
Yeah, and on top of the fact that it was the first time I was ever pregnant, and dealing with feeling like such a failure. And that was the biggest thing. I felt like a failure.
Yeah.
In every sense of the word.
I remember the feeling.
And nobody could understand that. And so I kept kind of pushing it down.
But all of those emotions and expectations and defeats are like 100% tangible and legit. 100%. 100%.
But it didn't feel like they were. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
you were like succumb under a mountain at that point in your life.
Right. And again, something that, most people look at and be like, all right, I mean, that sucks, but, just keep going. Like, it happens to so many people.
Carry on.
When you really start looking, you see how it happens to so many people.
It is
and
very common.
I only knew that because I felt so unbelievably alone in it.
Right.
That I was searching, and I would find so stupid, but like celebrities that had miscarriages, and listening to things.
You became aware of that entire concept, because prior, why would you even have any realm of it?
Right.
Or any.
And again, as a healthcare provider, I knew that it was common.
Okay.
Statistically,
Okay.
but not. It was very difficult to marry my clinical and medical knowledge to my emotional knowledge.
Well, that you can compartmentalize. You can't even. It is. The raw, innate lion in your belly, which is like your raw emotion, versus your educated, rational, pragmatic brain.
Right.
There's no connection.
And that, that pragmatic brain, I need to be under control for my patients. You know what I mean? Like, I can be emotional in the sense that I can be empathetic.
But you can't be irrational.
But I can't be irrational, and I can't allow that emotion to overtake me.
Correct.
Because I really have to help them.
Correct.
So I had so much of that, but then when it happened to me, I just completely fell apart. And it was very lonely. And that was really difficult, especially between Tim and I, because he hadn't I was the one that was pregnant, and although it was only for 2 months, that again, that first experience and all that, and I experienced the loss by myself. All the emotional factors of just initially being pregnant, I was experiencing alone because Tim didn't have the chance to do that. It was like just a concept to him at that point,
Women become mothers the minute they find out they are actually conceptually pregnant. The minute they see those 2 lines, because those 2 lines far exceed any feeling of nausea or fuzzy kicking or anything like that. So women become mothers when they find out they're pregnant. And I'm going to use this analogy, not stereotypically, but from my own family. My husband did not become a father until his daughter was on the table next to me in the OR.
Yeah.
So the years of trials and struggles.
And that's very common. That's not to say anything about Mark or his ability
no.
But that's it's not happening to their body.
Correct.
Normal. So Tim had a really difficult time, trying to understand where I was at and trying to be there for me appropriately, which he did to the best of his ability, but it was really tough, to the point that he actually recommended that I go talk to somebody. And when I did, I called up this group, made an appointment, told them what it was for, and when I showed up, the woman came out of the door and was about 9.5 months pregnant.
We talked about this the other episode, how, that is just, there you go.
I mean, there you go. Like we talked about last episode,
that is
when you're having such a hard time with either getting pregnant or having loss, all you see is pregnant women. Well, but that was like, I'm not even being crazy right now. Like, this woman just came out for me to talk about my experience, and I'm staring at her back. And not only was she so pregnant, but she was like the skinny pregnant, so she was all like, literally, it was just belly like in my face.
Did you actually stay and talk to her?
I thought about running away. I started immediately welling up in tears as soon as I saw her. And I thought to myself, for my own possible state of mind and for my marriage, I'm going to go into that room and talk to this woman.
Oh, you did good. Oh, that's honorable.
And I did.
Oh, good for you. Okay. I'm impressed.
At which point, I basically poured my heart out to her about my whole experience and my life and all of that, which is quite a bit of information.
You have a story.
And then at the end of the session, she kindly referred me to somebody else, which I never went to.
Okay.
Because I was,
turned
disgusted.
off. Moving on.
So that was that. So my doctor was very reassuring that, again, this is very common, just keep trying. And so I kind of had to, get my shit together and keep going. So that was, we lost that pregnancy January of 2016. We continued trying naturally, did some ovulation stuff, which kind of just made me a little crazy. My period was extremely regular. My ovulation was
irregular?
Regular.
Regular. You were above the clock.
Yeah. Wasn't really happening. So by August, I decided to go to RMA because I was like, it's not really happening. Let's just make sure that there's nothing else going on. Let's get some kind of blood work going and some tests and whatnot.
Conscientious.
Right. So I went to RMA, started the blood work, established myself as a patient. We went away that same week on vacation to Vegas. And when I came back, found out I was already pregnant.
Via RMA?
No. All I did was establish myself as a patient. I went in there for my first visit to do blood work.
Consultation, okay.
And I didn't realize that at that time I was already pregnant. Okay, well, the great thing was now I was already their patient, so they were going to monitor me.
Brilliant.
Which was awesome. Great. I've had this horrible experience. Now I'm going to be with this group that's going to monitor me really closely for the first, I believe it's about, 8 to 12 weeks of my pregnancy, and make sure everything's cool, then ship me over. Awesome. So that's what happened. Ultrasounds, blood work, everything is going great. No indication of any problem whatsoever. It was scary to believe that. I was very apprehensive to kind of let go of that fear that something was going to go wrong. Around between 16 and 18 weeks, I finally kind of started letting go, we found out that it was a boy. We named him Jameson Chad. Chad was the middle. His middle name was after my brother that I had actually lost as a stillborn when I was 6 years old. So I had finally kind of started to let go a little bit and, accept the fact that we were going to have this little boy. And I was having a lot of Braxton Hicks. One night I came home and I was having quite a bit of it. And I was really trying to not be...
How far along were you?
At this point, it was 18 weeks. Everything you look up on the internet, Braxton Hicks is normal. Basically, anything you look up when you're pregnant, 50% of the time it's normal, 50% of the time it's not. So it doesn't mean shit.
Right, it means nothing.
And it was getting worse. I'll try to speed up the story as much as possible. I realized that there was a problem. I'll put it that way. We went to the hospital. They told me that my doctor came in telling me that my entire pregnancy was in my vagina and that there was no way it was going to survive. And I should just take something for the pain because, that's all that I could really do right then. And I was having extreme pain. I was in labor.
You were in labor.
And I was sobbing because I understood what all that meant. And with that, I got very nauseous and I threw up. And when I threw up, my water broke. And long story short, they kept me in the hospital for, 2 to 3 days, numb from the waist down the entire time, anticipating that I was going to go into labor to actually deliver the baby, since my water had broke. And that never happened. He was perfectly healthy, fine, awesome heartbeat, everything looked great.
But there was no amniotic fluid.
So they were extremely worried about my health and the possibility of infection because now if there's no protective sac there, it's just kind of an open way for bacteria to get in and, cause a lot of problems, not only to the baby, but particularly to me.
To you, yeah.
So they basically offered me the possibility of ending the pregnancy several times, which I refused, and sent me home to be on bed rest and hope that the amniotic fluid would regenerate. And
is that even a thing? I've never even heard of that.
It's rare, but sometimes the membrane can reform. So they were hopeful that would happen. So I went home on bed rest. Every time I got up to pee, amniotic fluid would leak out of me. And after after about 2 weeks of being on bed rest, I started to get a fever and it progressed and they had me come back in. And my doctor basically explained that coming back into the hospital that, most likely with this fever, the delivery was going to happen either naturally or they were going to have to induce me to basically save my life and that he would not survive. At this point I was 20 weeks and, essentially the lungs are not mature enough to
viable
survive.
Pregnancy is technically
23.
I would say 23 or 24 weeks and even then they would give an infant the steroids to speed up the lungs and whatever else, which can take another 8 to 10 days. So at 20 weeks,
yeah,
you're just under the bar.
And the whole time, every time they monitored him, heart rate was great. He, was
fine,
fighting.
Yeah.
And my feeling was, as long as he was fighting, I was going to fight. Went in the hospital, and basically I was uncontrollably shaking all night, probably because of the infection and fear. And somewhere around a little after 6 a.m, he decided to come on out. And I spontaneously delivered him, and he was not able to survive. We spent the day holding him, and it was the most beautiful and horrific thing I've ever experienced, for sure. it gave me a perspective. The entire experience of the miscarriage and then losing Jameson gave me a perspective that I value and give so much respect to women like yourself who have gone through it over and over again. You learn to never ask a woman if she's pregnant, to never ask a woman after she gets married, when is she going to have a baby?
Never.
I don't care if it's been 10 years, you have no idea what has possibly gone on.
You just don't go there.
Right. And, I remember one of my first days back to work after, because I had to basically just sit in the house and try to
keep
breathe for a month before going back to work. And one of my first days back, my patient said to me, "When are you going to have a baby? You better get on that."
Not knowing. Right.
And I had to just go, well, we'll see. And I couldn't even
you couldn't swallow.
So, yeah. So the loss of Jameson was totally a different type of loss than miscarriage, because this one really incorporated Tim so much more. Mm-hmm. Tim immediately became a father as soon as he held him. Mm-hmm. He got it.
Yeah.
It with, instantaneously.
Right.
And now it was truly both of our losses. Mm-hmm. And
we're tough. They're not tough. No, but
it's just different.
It's just different because now it's one thing to mentally wage a war and fight a battle as a woman in our own head, and to be the rocks and the rock stars that we are, let's be honest. But the minute you give a husband or our husbands a child, my daughter, after all of our journey, was born barely alive. She ended up having to get flown into New York City for open heart surgery, which she wasn't supposed to live through. And there's Mark with his wife in the hospital, right, and his baby in another hospital. The chapters of our lives just continue to go. But the point is the minute you take that man and you, regardless of the prior history, and you make them a father, and then in Tim's case, take Jameson away, or in Mark's case, put Amelia in a helicopter and be like, you have her, but you don't get to keep her because she's not really meant to be here. Mm-hmm. There then becomes this, not that it wasn't grandiose or real before, but you're now sharing it with another human being who you intrinsically care for so deeply, and who intrinsically is maybe a little bit more vulnerable, but they have a different role, and their role is to love you and take care of you and then be the father to this child. And it becomes so much more fucked up and complicated and overwhelming, good and bad. It's just so much emotion. So much emotion. I feel like guys are wired to be fixers, like fixers and protectors, and that's not a gender. I think it's just I think that's just kind of what they're wired to do. Well, maybe it's a gender thing. But that's your opinion. You're allowed to have that.
There's
nothing wrong with that.
And but women are fixers and caregivers in a different way. Mm-hmm. And when there isn't a solution to a problem, they get. I think that they often feel kind of lost because they don't know how to fix it.
No.
And then beyond that,
out of control.
And that's how to fix it for someone else, and that's difficult enough for them.
Right.
But when they don't know how to fix it for themselves,
or the woman that they care more about than their own self,
right?
Helplessness.
It's the entire experience. I delivered Jameson. Then there was a situation that happened after where my placenta, and this is very common when you have early deliveries, the placenta was not coming out, but it was detaching, and I was bleeding very badly. And so now Tim's standing in the room, and not only had he just lost his son, which you could barely wrap your head around, his wife was bleeding out, but he didn't even realize at the time how bad it was. They rushed me off to the OR, and he was left in this room by himself holding his dead son.
Mm-hmm. Just like Mark, but different.
It's
just there goes the wife. or separate
Right.
situations.
And you know, it's just an unspeakable,
Grief.
yeah. And then how do you come home after that and just go about life? And you know, I will say with that experience, a lot of people did come out of the woodwork and share their stories. And definitely what we learned from that is that it didn't matter what your story was. It didn't matter
How or when.
right, or what the real circumstance was. Any loss of a child was something that stuck with you, and it continues to stay with you forever. And I mean, Tim had people that had lost their children, you know, 20 years before, and just starting to say the sentence of "I lost my daughter or son," they immediately broke down. The loss is unbelievable, and it was real, and it was a struggle for a long time, and I mean, look, you know, it continues to be, and it always will be
forever. It will be forever.
And so to speed up a little bit, that was a real struggle. Very soon after that, my sister-in-law was pregnant. I think she was actually pregnant at the time, and either didn't know or they hadn't told anybody yet. We went out to dinner maybe a couple weeks after all of us, and I noticed that she wasn't having a glass of wine, and I immediately knew. And I literally couldn't speak the entire dinner. I couldn't function, you know, and I was so fucking angry. I was so angry. I was so angry at God. I was angry at the universe. I was angry at anything I could just be angry at. I was angry at every fucking pregnant woman I saw. You know, I felt so cheated.
Robbed.
And I just didn't know what to do with all that anger. The first time I felt so much failure, and I still felt failure the second time around for sure. But the anger was much more overwhelming and dominant.
Well, because the loss,
because I had it. Because I had it. I had him.
It was a tangible entity a tangible child that was taken away from you. Whereas your miscarriage, I don't even know, one or two that were at the point where it was something and then it wasn't. That was the idea.
There's so much more. They're a little more abstract, you know,
because it's the emotional connection to what will become or what is going to be in your head. You're already planning on how you're going to be a mother. Maybe you saw an article of clothing or a random stuffed animal, and that invokes this, oh my God, I'm actually going to bring in, and then you become hypersensitive to everything that is baby, and it makes you warm and fuzzy inside, and it's a very happy, eager time. But
it's conceptual.
It's very conceptual. Yeah. It's very conceptual. But to have
an actual being.
To have been given a child, to then hold them dead.
Yeah.
To know that they were alive and okay 1 minute, to know that your body failed and Mother Nature and no one else is to blame. Again, I'm speaking from a very non-religious place right now, but it didn't work. To no one's fault. It is not your fault that your body failed. It is not your fault that Mother Nature just didn't work. Those are like non-emotional, non-subjective facts, cold hard facts. It just didn't work. But go back to being a human being and a woman with emotions. You were robbed.
Right.
Point blank from what you had, and now you were holding it deceased, and you were going to at some point going to have to give it to a nurse, and the nurse was going to take it away, and you were going to get it back in an urn. Like,
correct.
On no grounds is that kosher. Cool, like the worst, most, like that is the lowest low.
Yes.
Lowest low.
And it's just to really, for lack of a better word, like just like unbelievably unfair. So that was our experience, and we really struggled individually. We really struggled together, Tim and I. It was a profound time in our marriage. We've come through it so much stronger. I'm so proud of him and us to have been able to keep up that communication and
survive
and get through it. Yeah,
survive.
And then we go through the process of now what? Now we try to figure out why. Now we try to figure out how do we get pregnant again. They couldn't figure out what happened. They still don't know why. So all they could do was try to move me forward to get me pregnant again. Now remember, at this point I've been pregnant twice on my own. So that further confounded them because I was able to,
You could get but couldn't stay.
Right. As I had mentioned before with the placenta, I had to be rushed and get the placenta out and stop the bleeding. And in the emergency of all of that, I was left with quite a bit of scar tissue in my uterus. So this brought us down a journey of multiple hysteroscopies, which a hysteroscopy is where they basically go in, scrape out your uterus, get all of that scar tissue and adhesions, because what happens in a uterus is, it like lays on itself. And when there's any kind of scar tissue, that adheres it so nothing can get in.
Kind of like Velcro.
Right. And nothing can get in and implant and grow. Right. So it's just like these cobwebs in there.
Cobwebs. That's a good analogy.
So they go in, scrape out all the cobwebs, get the flesh all nice and fresh, and hope that it will kind of grow almost like a scab over it to heal itself before it lays on itself again
to cobweb
and
again.
Regrows those adhesions and cobwebs. Right. So we went through 6 of those procedures, which are surgeries. I'm knocked out, the whole thing. A lot of things go in your vagina. A lot of medications go in your vagina. A lot of tubes.
A lot of doctors' hands.
Just
a
lot.
Yeah.
And you just do it. You do it. It's what you become this. Okay, I'll do whatever you want.
You're a robot.
And if you're telling me you could potentially give me a baby, I will do whatever you want.
Yep.
And
you're a good student at that point.
Right. And that's what we did.
You do your homework.
And we started to, because this is all a real process, they had to get my uterus to the point that they thought that it could even potentially hold a pregnancy, because that was something they told me. As soon as they saw the adhesions in there, they said, I don't even know if your uterus could hold a pregnancy. So then it became the conversation of a surrogate, which is not something that we could afford, really. And I couldn't even really go there. I couldn't believe
there
it.
Yet.
Yeah.
No, you weren't there.
So I said, no, keep trying. So 6 hysteroscopies got us to a place of, I think your uterus might be okay. We had gone through 3 egg retrievals, one of which ended up yielding absolutely no viable eggs.
Sounds like me. I'm laughing. It's not funny.
I mean, well, the eggs were there, but like by the time they, by the time they got to the petri dish stage and day 6,
there was nothing. No. She did a Catherine. Got it.
Right. So after all that, we were left with 3 and went in for the
embryo
procedure
transfer.
And nothing. Didn't get pregnant.
Okay. So you used 1 embryo.
Yep, 1 embryo.
And nothing took.
Nothing took.
Okay.
At that point, so we lost Jameson in January of 2016 and had been going through all of this because everything takes time. The medications, the procedures, it was such a dance. And all of that time it took to get to just to the point where we could implant 1.
Embryo transfer. Frozen embryo transfer.
It wasn't like we kept trying, IUI. No, that was the time that it took to 1.
Priming.
So at that point, Tim and I were like, you know what? It was the very end of April 28th. I was like, it's about to be summer. Let's just take the summer and just relax. And So that's what we did. We just decided we were gonna.
You left the 2 frozen?
Yep. Keep them. Let's just wait. I got my period right, within a week or so after that. We went about our life. June 4th, I was going to go back in for another saline sonogram, which is basically where they put saline up into your uterus. They take a look at the uterus lining to see where it's at, how it's doing, to make sure that there's no issues. And again, with all of my history. So they were going to check it out after, the failed implant. I came home from work. I had picked up a bottle of wine. Had a pregnancy test in my bathroom because, we always have pregnancy tests.
You always have them in the drawer.
There, always.
Always.
About to get in the shower. For no reason in my mind whatsoever, peed on a stick.
But when were you due? Like when?
What, my period?
So you should have gotten it within.
I was probably going to be getting it. At this point I can't remember because they had to time the saline sonogram with my period.
So within days.
So I was supposed to be getting it anytime, and and then would have gone for the saline sonogram.
Okay.
Or maybe they were going to do saline sonogram and then I was going to. I can't remember exactly.
But I mean, obviously
it was within the time, but it wasn't like I had missed it necessarily.
You were coming up,
and I was like, oh my god, it was like a month after, and I still hadn't got it. It wasn't anything like that.
No,
there was just I don't know why I did it.
Compelling urge, love that.
Peed on a stick. About to get in the shower, have a towel on, and I look down and it says pregnant. And I did not know what to do with myself. I said, Tim.
I've heard this story before, by the way. Heard this story.
Tim's sitting down here in the living room. I'm in the bathroom. And he's like, what? And I'm like, come here. I couldn't even speak it because maybe it would go away.
Or maybe it wasn't real. Or maybe it was real.
I couldn't even conceptualize this.
Right.
And yeah, sure enough, I was pregnant. And that was our little Audrey Emerson that decided to work her way in there with no help from RMA, not to take anything away from them because I'm sure I know that all the work that they did on my uterus got it primed up.
But she was meant to be your one.
But she got in there and burrowed in and held strong.
Yeah, she did.
Up until the point that she decided she wanted to come out 2 months early. But that's what it is. It's very indicative of her personality. It's very indicative of her personality. I will say that. And not to say that the pregnancy didn't have a lot of ups and downs. It was, again, given the history, I was petrified the entire pregnancy. They found that I had a very rare potential clotting disorder, basically, which was a combination of Tim and I. They still could not answer whether that was what was responsible for Jameson because it just didn't make sense.
For his circumstances.
Right. It was possible, but just didn't make enough sense to be the obvious cause. I had to undergo IVIG infusions twice a week for 4 hours at a clip for the entire pregnancy and go on high-dose prednisone. But
doesn't
here
matter.
she is.
She's here.
Here she is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will never take any of my experience for granted. Mm-hmm. And again, it has left both of us with an appreciation for life, for our child, for each other, and definitely has left us extremely scarred. Even our experience with Audrey being in the NICU for 6 weeks. I think that there's something to be said about the PTSD.
I was just going to interrupt you and just say the PTSD. My daughter was in the NICU post-heart surgery for 3.5 weeks. Mm-hmm. Very different NICU reasons, very different, but that is a nightmare in and to itself.
Yes, absolutely.
Interrupting you.
No.
Purell hand sanitizer. The New York Presbyterian was where my daughter was given her surgery. Inevitably, she was transferred back to our neck of the woods to Morristown Memorial. the Purell hand sanitizer that was in the NICU at every possible door and station has a smell. Not all Purell hand sanitizer smells the same because there are different
Yes.
varieties or flavors or scents, but this one particular one, and I remember after she finally came home and we got to after she left there and came to Morristown's hand sanitizer smelled different. And I remember in some fucked up way longing for the smell of the other one, and I tried to like smell it, but I couldn't because it was like Downy versus Tide. And then my daughter is now just 3. It must have been, I don't know, a year plus ago. I was somewhere and I took some hand sanitizer from some random retail probably place, and I smelled the smell. Mm-hmm. And it literally took me back to
Instantaneous.
2-day post C-section trekking up New York City street blocks, seeing this infant who I had no emotional connection to because my story was my story, and so I was completely compartmentalized in a shell of terror, and smelling the smell, and it took you.
It was like, was it comforting?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now. Back then, it was obviously what it was, but the smell of that smell, it takes you back to. It feels like a lifetime ago. But then if you just dust off a little dirt and like move the trap door, it is right below that surface.
Yep.
Right below that surface.
So
yeah.
I think that's a good place to end because I think that getting into the true PTSD, and there's actually studies on this, of having a child in the NICU is a real thing. And I think that's maybe something I'd like to delve into
next time.
Another time.
We both could do that.
Absolutely.
I got stories.
Oh, yes. All right, guys.
Chapter 2, infertility. Peace out.